Darth Revan, Shadows of Legacy. Chapter 1. A Hidden Spark. Origins on Deralia. The galaxy remembered Darth Revan as a warrior, a conqueror, a savior, and a heretic, but in truth, even his name was shrouded in mystery. The Jedi archives list him as Revan, yet this was a title he chose, not a birth name. Whispers in ancient records, cloaked in layers of redaction and denial, point toward the outer rim world of Deralia, a quiet, unremarkable planet that fostered no great civilization, produced no notable bloodlines, and sat far from the beating heart of galactic power. Whether Revan truly hailed from Deralia or merely claimed it for reasons lost to time is uncertain, and therein lies the first lesson of his story. Revan was a being of deliberate reinvention. The Force-sensitive child who emerged from obscurity was not born of legacy but of potential, and it was this potential that would one day shake the very foundations of the galaxy. The Jedi Order, ever vigilant in its search for those attuned to the Force, found Revan while still a youngling. How he was discovered remains unclear. Some say it was through a Jedi Seeker passing through Deralia during a planetary census. Others suggest Revan was given up by parents who feared his strange dreams and instinctive abilities. What is known is that the boy who would become Revan exhibited a strength in the Force that astonished even the most senior of the Jedi Masters. Not merely strong in raw energy, Revan demonstrated awareness beyond his years, grasping concepts and metaphysical truths that most Padawans struggled to internalize even in adolescence. He did not simply feel the Force, he understood it. Brought to the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, Revan adapted quickly to the rigorous demands of Jedi life. He absorbed knowledge with a hunger that bordered on obsession, and he soon developed a reputation not only for his brilliance, but for his insatiable desire to know. Where others followed instruction, Revan questioned. Where his peers repeated dogma, he dissected and reassembled it. He was not disrespectful, but his curiosity stretched the patience of instructors who preferred obedient acolytes. Among the other younglings and Padawans, Revan was both admired and resented. Charismatic and confident, yet occasionally aloof, often preferring tomes of ancient teachings and meditation chambers over social gatherings. Still, he cultivated a small circle of companions who were drawn to his vision, sensing even then that Revan was destined for more than quiet servitude in the archives. During his Padawan years, Revan studied under multiple masters, each of whom struggled to contain his boundless intellect and philosophical independence. Master Craven noted in her records that Revan possessed a dangerous clarity of purpose. Master Solon Von remarked that he learns with the intensity of a man preparing for war. It was no surprise when the council assigned Revan to Master Zar Lestin of Dantooine, a Jedi historian known for his open mind and tolerance for unconventional thinking. Under Zar's guidance, Revan flourished. The calm serenity of Dantooine's enclave offered him the space to explore the deeper currents of the Force, and he began studying not just Jedi teachings, but ancient Force traditions, some long forgotten or forbidden. He showed particular fascination with the Rakata, the builders of the Infinite Empire, whose dark history intersected with ancient Force use. While others feared such knowledge as a path to corruption, Revan saw it as essential understanding. Revan's philosophical leanings grew more complex with time. He spoke often of the Force as a living will, not merely a power to be obeyed, but a consciousness that needed interpretation. He resisted the strict light/dark dichotomy of Jedi teaching, questioning whether emotion itself was always a path to suffering. To him, attachment could be a source of strength. Passion, properly wielded, could lead to clarity. These ideas alarmed some of his mentors, but his skill and results were undeniable. He passed his trials swiftly and with distinction, becoming a Jedi Knight while still younger than most. The Jedi Council, divided on how to handle him, adopted a cautious approach, allowing his rise while keeping a watchful eye on his path. Despite his independence, Revan was deeply loyal to the Jedi Order in his early years. He undertook diplomatic missions to volatile sectors, successfully negotiating peace between rival clans on Taris and calming a forced disturbance on the moon of Drulon, where ancient Sith artifacts had awakened strange phenomena. During these assignments, Revan began to attract his own following, other Jedi who gravitated to his leadership, his vision, and his sharp grasp of both the Force and the political web of the Republic. Among them was Alec, a towering, idealistic Jedi who would later become known as Malak. The two formed a bond forged in shared ideals, mutual respect, and the fires of growing conflict. Revan was the thinker, the strategist. Alec was the heart, the fist, the loyal companion who grounded Revan's spiraling intellect with human simplicity. But even as Revan's star rose, the Jedi Council grew uneasy. His passion for ancient history, especially Sith lore, was cause for concern. Though he never crossed into overt heresy, he often debated openly with senior Jedi, challenging their interpretation of the code and advocating for greater engagement with the wider galaxy. He argued that the Jedi could not remain passive while suffering spread across the Republic. In one council session, he reportedly said, "The Force is not merely a refuge from conflict. It is the voice that calls us to action." These words, later quoted by Revanites and scholars alike, would become a core tenet of the movement that bore his name. As the Mandalorian threat began to swell on the galactic frontier, Revan's frustration with the Jedi's inaction reached a boil. The Council, wary of repeating the mistakes of the Great Sith War, urged caution and meditation, but Revan, now a celebrated knight with a growing network of supporters, saw this as cowardice cloaked in philosophy. He began organizing Jedi missions to aid border worlds, unofficially at first, but with increasing boldness. Revan's ability to inspire was unmatched. His speeches stirred ancient truths and ignited the convictions of those who believed the Jedi should do more. Young Jedi followed him not because they sought glory, but because he gave them purpose. The seeds of rebellion were planted not with rage, but with clarity. Revan did not lash out against the Council. He tried to persuade them. He laid out plans, proposed strategies, warned of the Mandalorians' true intent. When they refused to act, he did not condemn them outright. He simply moved forward without them. His belief in the Force's will overrode his loyalty to the Council's authority. To Revan, morality was not obedience but action. This was the beginning of the revanchist movement, a schism not born of darkness but of conviction. The Jedi Council could no longer ignore him. Some saw a young hero driven by noble ideals. Others saw the early signs of a fallen star. Master Vrook Lamar warned, "His light blinds even himself." Master Atris, who would later become one of his fiercest critics, noted in her personal journals that Revan understands too much, too fast. He is a nexus of inevitability. And yet, at this stage, Revan had not turned. He remained, in his mind, a Jedi. He did not seek power for its own sake. He sought knowledge, balance, justice. It was the galaxy that would drive him to extremes. His early life was not a tale of corruption, but of intensity, of a Force-sensitive mind trying to reconcile the weight of destiny with the limitations of orthodoxy. The Jedi Order had trained him, shaped him, but they had also constrained him, and in their fear of what he might become, they failed to grasp what he already was. Revan was not simply a student, he was a question, one the Jedi could not answer, and the galaxy could not ignore. Chapter 2: The Mandalorian Wars. Revan the General. In the years following Revan's rise to prominence within the Jedi Order, a new storm began to gather at the edges of the galaxy. The Mandalorians, a warrior culture rooted in conquest and honor, had begun to stir once more. Under the leadership of a new warlord known as Mandalore the Ultimate, their clans united with a singular vision: the expansion of Mandalorian dominion across the galaxy. Their incursions started quietly, testing the borders of the Republic along the Outer Rim. At first, the Senate dismissed these raids as isolated events. The Jedi Council, still wary from the scars of the Great Sith War, counseled patience and introspection, citing the dangers of premature engagement. But Revan saw the truth long before others did. He saw a storm rising, one that would consume the Republic if not met head-on with strength and vision. To Revan, the Mandalorians were not just another border threat. He had studied their history, understood the patterns of their culture, and recognized the unmistakable signs of organized warfare. These were not mere raiders. They were preparing for a crusade. While the Jedi Council deliberated and mediated from the safety of Coruscant, Revan listened to refugees, analyzed battle reports, and saw firsthand the devastation on worlds like Seriko, Taris, and Duros. Civilians were being slaughtered, cities leveled, cultures extinguished in the name of Mandalorian honor. Revan's frustration turned to fury. The Force had given him sight and strength, and yet the very order that had trained him now refused to act. He believed in the will of the Force, but he also believed that its will was not passive. It called for intervention, for action. When the Jedi Council again refused to intervene, citing their neutrality and the need for deeper understanding, Revan made his choice. He would not stand idle. In open defiance of their authority, he began to speak publicly against their decision, calling for Jedi to rise in defense of the Republic. His speeches echoed through holonet transmissions and Jedi enclaves, a mixture of impassioned philosophy and unflinching pragmatism. He argued that the Force guided them not toward detachment but responsibility, that to be a Jedi was not to watch suffering but to end it. And many listened. Young knights, disillusioned Padawans, even some seasoned masters began to gather around Revan, drawn by his clarity and conviction. Thus was born the Revanchist movement, a grassroots rebellion within the Jedi Order itself, a coalition of Force-sensitive warriors who refused to let doctrine outweigh duty. Revan and his closest ally, Alec, who would later become known as Malak, traveled from system to system, rallying support. They walked among soldiers, met with Republic generals, and fought alongside militias trying to hold the line. Revan's presence on the battlefield was transformative. He inspired with words but also with action, placing himself in the heart of danger, coordinating strikes, healing wounded, and making difficult decisions that many Jedi would have balked at. His tactics were unorthodox, blending Jedi intuition with a cold understanding of warfare. He used the Force not just for combat, but for strategy, reading enemy intent, predicting troop movements, and striking where the enemy was weakest. Within a year, the Revanchists had evolved into a full-fledged military force, Jedi-led and Republic-supported, with Revan as its de facto commander. And yet, it was not until the tragedy of Cathar that the galaxy began to truly understand the scale of the war that was coming. Cathar had once been a serene world, home to a proud and peaceful race of feline humanoids known for their deep spirituality and connection to the Force. But when Revan arrived with a scouting party to investigate reports of Mandalorian occupation, they found only ash and silence. The surface was scorched, the cities gone, the oceans poisoned. In the sands they uncovered a mass grave, thousands of Cathar executed and buried beneath layers of sediment and time. As Revan knelt by the grave, the Force answered his grief with a vision. He saw the final moments of the massacre, felt the terror of the Cathar people, and witnessed the brutal efficiency with which the Mandalorians had cleansed the planet. But what affected him most was the image of a lone Mandalorian, Casus Fett, ordering the slaughter with cold indifference. The vision shook Revan to his core and was not simply death that he had seen, but evil, true evil, methodical and unapologetic. And in that moment, any hesitation he had left dissolved. Revan emerged from the vision changed. He removed his Jedi mask, placing it on the sands of Cathar, and instead took the battle-scarred mask of a fallen Mandalorian. This mask would become a symbol, one he would wear into battle and never remove in public. To Revan, it was not a trophy, but a reminder of the lives lost, the innocence destroyed, and the cost of inaction. With the mask came resolve. The war would be won, not just fought. The Mandalorians would be defeated, and they would never again rise to threaten the galaxy. This shift was subtle at first, but in hindsight it marked the beginning of Revan's transformation. The young philosopher had become a warrior, and that warrior was now a general. As the war escalated, so too did Revan's command. The Republic granted him full strategic authority in several sectors, and his military campaigns became legendary. He utilized decoy fleets, hyperspace ambushes, planetary ion interference, and psychological warfare to devastating effect. His knowledge of ancient Sith tactics, gleaned from years of forbidden reading, gave him a decisive edge. He understood how to break morale, how to divide enemy command structures, and how to predict the behavior of a culture driven by conquest. He respected the Mandalorians as warriors, but he used that respect to dismantle them. Revan's strategies won battles that should have been lost, and liberated worlds thought already doomed. And yet with each victory, the lines blurred. Jedi under his command began to adopt more militaristic behavior. Discipline hardened into rigidity. Compassion narrowed into pragmatism. Some whispered that Revan was becoming what he fought against. But few could argue with results. The culmination of the war came at Malachor V, a dead world steeped in dark energy. Revan selected it not by chance, but by design. He knew the gravity wells, the magnetic anomalies, the ancient Sith structures hidden beneath its crust. He lured the Mandalorian fleet there with promises of a decisive confrontation, and then unveiled his final gambit. Revan had constructed a weapon, one developed with the aid of Republic engineers and Force scholars under the strictest secrecy. It was known as the Mass Shadow Generator, a superweapon capable of collapsing the gravitational field of a planet and anything within its reach. Positioned in orbit, Revan's forces engaged the Mandalorians in a brutal, sprawling battle. As the tide began to shift and casualties mounted, Revan gave the order. The Mass Shadow Generator activated, and in a single, horrific moment, Malachor V was torn apart. Thousands of ships were dragged into the gravity well and shattered. The surface of the planet convulsed and imploded, leaving behind a fractured world of floating debris and twisted metal. The Mandalorians were annihilated. Mandalore the Ultimate was captured and executed by Revan himself, though not before revealing that their crusade had been influenced by a dark presence in the unknown regions. Revan said nothing of this revelation to the Republic. The war was over and the galaxy rejoiced. Revan returned a hero, hailed as the savior of the Republic. But those closest to him saw the change. His eyes held less light. His voice was colder, more deliberate. He had won the war, but something within him had been scorched by the fire. The Jedi Council, still silent throughout the war, now found themselves faced with a problem they could no longer ignore. Revan's actions had defied their authority, broken countless codes and introduced dangerous precedents. And yet, his victory had saved billions. The people loved him. Soldiers idolized him. Jedi followed him. To censure him now would invite rebellion, and so they hesitated once more. Revan, meanwhile, had already begun to pull away from their reach. He did not seek recognition. He sought answers. The revelation on Malachor V haunted him. Who had influenced the Mandalorians? What threat lay in the unknown regions? Why did the Force draw him ever onward, deeper into shadows where light could not reach? Revan's war had ended, but his journey had just begun. The general who had defeated the greatest warrior culture in the galaxy now turned his gaze toward darker stars. What he would find there would change not only himself, but the fate of the galaxy for generations to come. Chapter 3. The Fall. Revan's turn to the dark side. The galaxy celebrated Revan as a hero, a warrior whose defiance of the Jedi Council and mastery of warfare had brought an end to the Mandalorian Wars. Republic worlds hung his image in government halls, soldiers tattooed his emblem on their armor, and his name echoed in every speech of praise from the Senate. But Revan did not linger in that adulation. Even before the last Mandalorian prisoners were processed, even before the ruins of Malachor V had settled into silence, Revan was already gone. Driven by a revelation whispered in the final breath of Mandalore the Ultimate, he vanished into the dark frontier of the unknown regions, accompanied by Alec, his most trusted friend and ally. The Mandalorians had not acted alone. There was something greater, something unseen, a presence manipulating the war from beyond known space. Revan sought the truth, and in doing so, he stepped into a deeper abyss than any Jedi had ever faced. The unknown regions were not merely unexplored, they were unstable, chaotic, shaped by ancient wars, broken stars, and currents of the Force that defied logic. The Republic had long feared these territories, not because they were empty, but because they were not. And it was in this fractured space that Revan found what he was looking for, though the price of discovery was far greater than he could have foreseen on a dead world orbiting a dying sun. Revan and Alec came into contact with the remnants of an empire thought long destroyed, the true Sith Empire. Hidden from the Republic for millennia, this empire had survived in the shadows, ruled by a being so powerful and so ancient that his very presence bent the Force around him like gravity. He was known to his followers as the Sith Emperor. To history, he would become Vitiate, and to Revan, he would be the architect of damnation. Vitiate did not conquer with fleets or armies, he conquered with the mind. Revan and Alec were brought before him not as prisoners, but as honored guests. They were shown the glory of a reborn Sith Empire, its precision, its discipline, its unquestioned hierarchy. Revan, ever the seeker of knowledge, was permitted to study Sith philosophy and ancient rituals. He was granted access to long-lost teachings from the time of Naga Sadow and Marka Ragnos, Sith lords whose legacies had once threatened to engulf the galaxy. It was not brutality that swayed Revan, but vision. In the Sith, he saw something the Jedi lacked, purpose forged in strength, clarity unburdened by compromise. The Jedi clung to peace, even when it became stagnation. The Sith embraced passion, even when it burned too brightly. To Revan, these were not absolutes, but tools, and Vitiate knew how to present them as such. Slowly, subtly, he infiltrated their thoughts. Through rituals, force bindings, and dark side manipulation, he twisted their wills until Revan and Alec ceased to be Jedi. They became Sith. They took new names to mark their rebirth. Revan became Darth Revan, the Dark Lord of the Sith. Alec, now bound by his master's vision, became Darth Malak. And yet, even under the Emperor's thrall, Revan's mind did not break. Somewhere beneath the conditioning, the Force-bonded rituals, and the arcane Sith dogma, a sliver of Revan's will remained intact. It was not resistance in the form of rebellion, but a reframing of intent. Revan did not serve Vitiate out of loyalty, he served because he saw a greater threat. The Emperor was preparing for an invasion of the Republic, one that would be more devastating than any Mandalorian war. To Revan, such an invasion would destroy everything. He could not stop the Emperor with the Jedi alone, nor with the Republic, but perhaps by becoming what the Emperor wanted, a Sith Lord of unmatched power, he could seize control of the Dark Empire from within and use its strength to strike preemptively, not in service of evil, but in preservation of peace. It was a gamble, one that required deception on a galactic scale, and sacrifices that would mark him forever. Revan would become the Sith Lord the galaxy feared, not because he had fallen, but because he believed it was the only way to save what remained. When Revan and Malak returned from the unknown regions, they did so not as broken tools of the Emperor, but as self-crowned rulers of a new Sith order. They forged their empire from the ashes of war, recruiting disillusioned Republic soldiers, war-weary Jedi, and those who had tasted Revan's leadership during the Mandalorian Wars. They uncovered the Star Forge, an ancient Rakatan superweapon hidden within the galactic core, a relic of the infinite empire that fed on the dark side to produce endless fleets. With the Star Forge at their command, Revan and Malak launched the Jedi Civil War, striking with precision, overwhelming military force, and a depth of strategy that no Sith Lord had ever employed. But it was not wanton destruction that defined Revan's campaign, it was calculation. He spared certain worlds, fortified others, disrupted trade to weaken corruption, and bypassed planets whose people would become future allies. His war was not against the Republic, it was against its sickness. Revan's manipulation of Jedi teachings and Sith doctrine reached its apex during this time. To his followers he preached discipline, not chaos. The Sith under Revan did not indulge in bloodlust, they enforced order. His apprentices were trained to understand the Force in its totality, drawing strength from both light and dark. He did not forbid compassion, so long as it served purpose. He did not demand hatred, so long as loyalty endured. Many historians later struggled to classify his rule. Was Revan a tyrant or a philosopher king? His empire bore the marks of Sith cruelty, but also a strange order, a structured hierarchy that avoided the self-cannibalism typical of Sith regimes. He encouraged thought, reward for merit, and even protection of certain Republic institutions under Imperial supervision. It was as if he sought to remake the Republic from within, pruning its flaws while retaining its strengths. And yet, all the while, Revan never disclosed the truth, that he was building an empire not to rule, but to one day use as a weapon against the true Sith. Darth Malak, on the other hand, began to drift. While loyal to Revan, he lacked his master's vision. Malak sought conquest, glory, and vengeance. His methods grew more brutal, more openly destructive. Where Revan sought to preserve, Malak wanted to punish. The tension between them simmered, and Revan, focused on his long game, often tolerated Malak's excesses, rather than risk a fracture in his empire. Still, the seeds of betrayal had already been planted. Revan's war, though vast, was not total. He avoided certain exterminations, spared Jedi who surrendered, and even attempted to sway some to his cause with offers of knowledge and power. His behavior confused both enemies and allies. The Jedi Council labeled him a fallen paragon, the embodiment of corruption. The Republic Senate called him a threat greater than the Mandalorians. But those who looked closely saw something more complex. Revan was not consumed by the dark side, he was wielding it. Throughout his reign, Revan engaged in a quiet subversion of Sith orthodoxy. He kept holocrons locked away from his apprentices, limited the spread of ancient rituals, and discouraged wanton cruelty. He viewed Sith teachings as tools, not absolutes. Where Jedi clung to suppression and Sith to indulgence, Revan advocated mastery through understanding. He walked a line so narrow that any misstep would mean oblivion, and all the while he searched for clues, secrets about Vitiate, about the true Sith, about how to dismantle the Dark Empire from which he had fled. But time was not on his side. The Starforge, powerful though it was, began to twist those who used it. Its dark energy fed on the minds of its operators, whispering madness, amplifying ambition. Malak, more exposed to its influence than Revan, began to view himself as the rightful ruler of the Sith. He saw Revan's restraint as weakness, and so, as the Jedi mounted a desperate counteroffensive, Malak seized his moment. In the chaos of battle, during a skirmish in the Outer Rim, Revan's flagship came under attack. The Jedi, led by Bastila Shan and her strike team, breached his vessel just as Malak, in an act of treachery, fired upon it with his own fleet. Revan, wounded and unconscious, was captured by the Jedi and brought back to the Republic. Malak declared himself Dark Lord, claiming the mantle by force. The Jedi, unaware of the full truth behind Revan's motivations, saw only a fallen Sith Lord, whose defeat offered a chance at redemption. Bastila, gifted with battle meditation, formed a force bond with Revan during his recovery. The Council, grasping at this bond as a potential salvation, made a fateful decision. They erased his memory, reshaping his identity, hoping that the man he once was could emerge free of darkness. Thus ended the reign of Darth Revan. The galaxy believed him dead, his empire fractured, his armies scattered. But in truth, Revan had merely been displaced, cast into a new life with no knowledge of the war he had fought or the secrets he still carried. The path he had chosen, to use darkness as a weapon of light, had failed. But in the silence of forgotten memory, something still stirred. A mind too sharp to stay buried, a will too strong to remain silent. Revan had fallen, but his story was far from over. Chapter 4: The Jedi Civil War, Dark Lord Ascendant. As the galaxy reeled from the devastation of the Mandalorian Wars, it scarcely had time to recover before a new darkness rose from the shadows. What the Republic and the Jedi Council had failed to perceive in the final days of that brutal conflict was the quiet construction of an empire unlike any before it. Under the leadership of Darth Revan, the Sith returned not as fractured cultists or hidden assassins, but as a unified and terrifying military force, with fleets gathered in secret, worlds subjugated under new banners, and Jedi turned to serve new masters. The Sith Empire, reborn under Revan's command, was disciplined, methodical, and driven by a leader whose brilliance in war was now fused with a command of the dark side. The galaxy named him a tyrant, a usurper, a fallen hero, but to those closest to him, Revan was still something else entirely, a figure who wore the mantle of a conqueror, not for power's sake, but for the preservation of a greater future few could yet see. At the center of Revan's growing empire stood a singular artifact of ancient horror and genius, the Star Forge. This colossal space-bound construct was not a creation of Revan himself, but a relic of the Rakata, the infinite empire that had ruled the galaxy long before the rise of the Republic. Buried within the unknown systems of the galactic core, the Star Forge drew its energy from the nearest star, feeding off its heat and light, but more sinisterly, it also consumed the dark side itself. Fueled by rage, hatred, and ambition, it was not a tool of industry, but of corruption. Revan, upon discovering it during his descent into the depths of Rakatan space, recognized its power but also its danger. He studied the Rakatan ruins, their lost language, their brutal conquests, and their fall into madness. He saw in their history a warning, but also an opportunity. With the Star Forge under his control, he could produce fleets and weapons on a scale the Republic could not match. But he also understood that to use it without falling to its influence would require constant vigilance, and a mind strong enough to remain master, not slave to the darkness that flowed through its core. Revan cloaked the origin of his war machine in mystery, allowing whispers of arcane technology and forgotten factories to circulate among his enemies. The truth of the Star Forge and its connection to the Rakata was kept hidden, known only to a select inner circle. It was more than a weapon of war. It was a test. Those who operated it often fell into madness, driven by the feedback of their own dark impulses. Revan allowed such failures to occur, watching carefully, learning who could be trusted and who would succumb. In this way, he weeded out weakness from within his empire while refining his control over the Star Forge. He did not rely on it as the Sith of old had relied on brute strength. He used it strategically, supplying key campaigns, fortifying sectors, and striking at the Republic's soft underbelly with surgical efficiency. But Revan's war was not won through firepower alone. He understood that the Jedi were not simply warriors, but symbols, and that to defeat them required more than superior tactics. It required psychological warfare. Revan began a campaign of subversion, targeting Jedi who had already questioned the Council during the Mandalorian Wars. He offered them purpose, clarity, and power. Some he turned with promises, others with truths. He revealed the Council's inaction during the war, their silence in the face of Mandalorian atrocities, their willingness to manipulate minds, including his own. Many Jedi, already shaken by what they had witnessed on the front lines, found themselves swayed not by hate, but by logic. If Revan had the strength to protect the galaxy, was he not the better guardian of peace? These Jedi became Sith, not out of anger, but out of conviction, and in them Revan saw the future. Force-sensitive individuals who could wield both light and dark without being consumed. He employed assassins and spies to infiltrate Jedi enclaves, used misinformation to spread paranoia, and orchestrated false flag operations to make the Council appear indecisive or treacherous. Entire planets were turned without a single battle, their leaders swayed by the promise of security and order. And yet, even as he carved deeper into Republic space, Revan avoided total annihilation. He left certain worlds untouched, preserved centers of learning, and maintained supply chains to ensure stability. He did not seek to break the Republic entirely. He sought to control it, reform it, and make it capable of surviving the greater threat he knew still lingered in the unknown regions. Within his inner circle, Revan surrounded himself with individuals chosen not for blind loyalty, but for utility. Each played a role in his grand design, and each served as a mirror reflecting a part of his own fractured soul. Admiral Saul Karath, once a decorated Republic officer, had defected after witnessing what he described as systemic failure within the Senate. Karath became the architect of Revan's naval campaigns, bringing with him not only experience, but the loyalty of entire fleet. His tactics were brutal, his methods efficient, and his loyalty to Revan absolute, at least for a time. Karath believed in the empire Revan was building, even as he remained unaware of its true purpose. He was a man of order, not philosophy, and Revan used that predictability to his advantage. Darth Bandon, on the other hand, was a true disciple of the dark side. Arrogant, ambitious, and deadly, Bandon served as Revan's enforcer, his shadow in the field. Trained personally in the use of both lightsaber and force, Bandon had risen quickly through the ranks, outpacing other acolytes through sheer aggression. Revan saw in Bandon a necessary weapon, blunt, loud, and terrifying, but he never entrusted him with deep secrets. To Revan, Bandon was a blade to be used, not a mind to be cultivated, and in this, Revan revealed a growing habit of duality. To the Sith Lords beneath him, he was a tyrant of conviction. To the officers and civilians in occupied territories, he was a stabilizer. To the Jedi, he was a traitor, and to himself, he was a reluctant architect of a future no one else could yet understand. The inner workings of Revan's empire were riddled with tension. Malak, once his closest friend, had become a rival in all but name. Though still subordinate, Malak chafed under Revan's command, often taking actions that contradicted broader strategies. Revan tolerated this insubordination so long as it served the greater cause, but his patience wore thin. Malak believed the Jedi should be exterminated without exception, while Revan often spared prisoners seeking to convert or observe them. Malak viewed compassion as weakness, and Revan's restraint as hesitation. Their philosophical divergence widened into operational schisms, and though Revan continued to lead with calculated precision, the seeds of betrayal continued to grow. There were other conflicts too, quieter and lesser known. On the frozen world of Jebel, Revan authorized the use of Sith alchemical weapons to study their effectiveness on biological hosts. The result was the creation of the techno-beasts' mechanical flesh hybrids, driven mad by corrupted force energy. When the experiment proved too unstable, Revan ordered the planet quarantined and the research sealed. He saw such knowledge as dangerous but potentially necessary in a future war with the true Sith. On Aethys, he dispatched explorers to recover holocrons buried in temples that predated the Republic itself, and in the Hutt-controlled world of Nar Shaddaa, he manipulated criminal syndicates to turn their influence toward destabilizing Republic trade routes. These moves were not mere brutality. They were preparations, investments in a future conflict that only he could see approaching. Despite his focus on control, Revan remained acutely aware of the Starforge's influence. He rarely visited the station directly, preferring to delegate its operations to trusted commanders who had demonstrated resistance to corruption. Yet even from a distance, he could feel its presence, pressing against his mind, feeding off his doubts and decisions. He meditated often, not to suppress emotion, but to manage it. He walked a knife's edge between control and surrender, between destiny and damnation. The dark side offered him clarity, and he used it to command, but it also whispered promises that tugged at his resolve. Revan believed himself in control, but the truth was more fragile than even he realized. The Jedi Civil War raged across systems, turning stars into graves and worlds into fortresses. Yet through it all, Revan continued to move, not like a Sith Lord, but like a Grandmaster, playing a game with galactic stakes. He tracked Jedi enclaves not just to destroy them, but to test them, to observe their choices. He sought out ancient knowledge not to dominate, but to preserve. And as he conquered, he rebuilt infrastructure, order, protection. The worlds that submitted to Revan's empire often found peace faster than those caught in the chaos of Republic reclamation. This duality confused many historians. How could the same man burn planets and then feed refugees? The answer lay in Revan's refusal to be defined by labels. He had once been a Jedi, then a Sith, and in truth, he was something else entirely, a Force-sensitive being who had peered into the abyss and decided to shape it, not fall to it. The tragedy of Revan was not that he became a monster, it was that he became a paradox, an enigma too complex for a galaxy built on binaries. His war was ruthless, his empire forged in violence, and yet beneath it all lay a blueprint not for tyranny, but for survival. The Jedi saw only a Sith Lord, the Republic only a usurper. But Revan, standing atop his empire, gazing into the void beyond the stars, knew the war they were fighting was not the light. It was the prelude to something far darker, and in that knowledge he bore the burden alone. The galaxy would not understand. The Jedi would not believe. And so, he ruled in shadow, as a Dark Lord ascending, building a future shaped by pain, held together by secrets, and guided by a vision that even now was beginning to crack. Chapter 5. Betrayal and Broken Memory. Capture by the Jedi. The weight of the war had begun to tear at the foundations of Revan's empire. Despite his carefully laid plans and calculated strategies, the unity of his Sith forces was fragile, held together more by fear and momentum than by true cohesion. At the heart of this instability stood Malak, no longer the loyal companion of the Mandalorian Wars, but a Sith Lord consumed by ambition and the intoxicating promise of unchecked power. While Revan focused on measured control, preserving key worlds, turning Jedi to his cause, and keeping the Star Forge's dark influence at bay, Malak saw conquest as an end in itself. The friction between the two deepened with every campaign. Malak had grown to resent Revan's restraint, seeing in it a weakness unbecoming of a Dark Lord. He craved destruction, demanded finality, and watched with mounting anger as Revan allowed Jedi to live, systems to remain untouched, and secrets to be kept from his own lieutenants. This tension, long simmering in the shadows, would soon erupt into betrayal, forever altering the course of the galaxy. In the Outer Rim, as the Republic launched a desperate counteroffensive led by a young Jedi named Bastila Shan, Revan personally took command of the fleet to confront them. Bastila, known for her rare and potent gift of battle meditation, had turned the tide of more than one engagement. Her presence amplified the coordination, morale, and effectiveness of Republic forces, giving them an edge even when outnumbered. Revan understood the danger she posed. If left unchecked, her abilities could undermine his strategic advantage and reveal too much of his own intentions. He devised a plan to capture her, hoping to use her power for his own ends, or at least remove her from the battlefield permanently. The trap was set. Revan's flagship, heavily shielded and surrounded by elite vessels, would draw the Republic fleet into close engagement. Once Bastila was aboard, he would isolate her, study her, perhaps even convert her to his cause. But Malak had grown impatient. He saw the battle not as a precise maneuver, but as a moment of opportunity. While Revan stood aboard his flagship, coordinating the ambush and awaiting Bastila's arrival, Malak acted. Without warning, Malak turned his guns on Revan's vessel. It was a calculated strike, fired not at the Republic, but at Revan himself. In the chaos of the battle, Malak's betrayal would appear to all observers as an act of desperation, a justified sacrifice to kill the enemy leader and end the war. But those close to Revan understood the truth. Malak had not just disobeyed, he had declared himself the new Dark Lord. The blast tore through the command deck of Revan's flagship, sending shockwaves through the Force as his presence was seemingly extinguished. Jedi boarding parties, led by Bastila and her strike team, fought their way aboard in the aftermath, expecting to find Revan dead. But he lived, barely. Injured, unconscious, and stripped of his memories in the explosion's aftermath, Revan was taken prisoner and brought before the Jedi Council. His life hung by a thread, and many on the Council urged his execution. They feared what he might become again, the chaos he had wrought, and the dark knowledge he carried. But Bastila, still bonded to Revan through the Force after their clash, argued for another path. The Council faced a dilemma unlike any in recent history. Before them lay the greatest enemy of the Republic, a man who had defied the Order, conquered half the galaxy, and used the dark side with unprecedented skill. And yet, he was also now a blank slate, his identity fractured, his memories scattered, his consciousness severed from the web of control he had built. To execute him would be safe, to imprison him risked escape, but to wipe his mind and attempt rehabilitation, to erase his identity and allow him to rediscover the galaxy as a new man, was a decision laden with ethical peril. The Jedi did not often employ such drastic mental intervention. The Force was not a tool of manipulation. And yet, desperate times eroded sacred boundaries. Bastila's bond with Revan offered a unique safeguard. Through her, they could monitor his mind, contain his power, and perhaps in time guide him back to the light. With solemn resolve and a great deal of secrecy, the Council used the Force to lock away Revan's memories. The process was not without danger. The mind of a Force sensitive as powerful as Revan could resist even in unconsciousness, but the injuries sustained in Malak's betrayal had left him vulnerable. The Council constructed a new identity for him, a Republic soldier with no ties to the Force, no past, no name beyond the one they assigned. Bastila would accompany him under the guise of a mission escort, but in truth, she was both guardian and jailer. Few in the Republic knew the truth of who he was. Fewer still knew the extent of the manipulation required to maintain the illusion. Revan's second life began in shadows. Assigned to a Republic vessel on routine patrol, he moved through the galaxy unaware of the power that simmered beneath his skin. His dreams, however, told a different story. Images of fire and stars, whispers of languages he did not understand, visions of places he had never been. He brushed them off as echoes of trauma, scars of war. But the Force never sleeps. Even suppressed, it called to him. His reflexes were too sharp, his instincts too precise. In combat, he reacted before he was conscious of danger. In diplomacy, he spoke with authority he could not explain. Those around him began to notice. Bastila, ever vigilant, watched with concern and hope. The man who had once sought to enslave the galaxy now fought to protect it. He showed kindness, courage, and curiosity. The question lingered. Was this the real Revan, or simply a mask born of ignorance? As Revan engaged in missions to recover star maps and investigate ancient ruins tied to the Star Forge, the Council's plan began to unravel. The memories they had buried started to stir. He touched relics that responded to him, entered temples whose doors opened at his approach, defeated enemies who called him by name. With each step, the blank slate they had created became more fragile. Revan began to question who he truly was. Bastila struggled to keep the truth hidden, torn between duty and a growing bond with the man she was meant to monitor. Their connection deepened, strengthened by shared battles and close calls, but at the heart of that bond was a lie, and Revan could feel it even if he could not yet see it. The ethics of the Council's decision weighed heavily on Bastila. She had followed orders, believing she was preserving peace. But as Revan showed courage, leadership, and a moral compass that even the Council lacked at times, she began to wonder whether they had simply traded one form of control for another. If Revan's darkness had come from vision, not malice, then was it truly gone? or simply waiting to be remembered? And if he was capable of redemption, of choosing the light without manipulation, then what right had they to make that choice for him? These questions gnawed at her, but she kept them buried, just as the Council had buried Revan's past. Yet within Revan himself, a hidden war raged. His instincts did not match his memories. His actions felt familiar, even when they were new. The dreams grew more vivid, more insistent, faces without names, worlds in flames, a masked figure staring back at him in reflection. He began to sense that he was not merely a man recovering from trauma, but a man lost within himself. The Force, though still veiled, began to flow more freely. He used it without thinking, guiding his squad through impossible odds, surviving ambushes, making impossible leaps of logic and intuition. The Jedi around him were unsettled. Some suspected, others whispered, but none could stop the unfolding of what the Force had already set in motion. Revan's journey across the galaxy in search of the Star Forge was a path of reawakening. Each discovery peeled back another layer. Each confrontation with Sith forces chipped away at the veil over his mind. He began to recognize architecture, recite phrases in Rakatan, sense disturbances in the Force with chilling accuracy, and when he finally stood within a temple on Dantooine and faced the truth, unveiled by the Council, confirmed by Bastila, and echoed by the Force itself, he did not crumble. He did not lash out. He absorbed the knowledge like a returning breath, a piece of himself restored. He was Revan, Dark Lord of the Sith. And yet he was not. The man who had once sought galactic control now stood with the power to reclaim it, but the heart to reject it. The Jedi had hoped to erase him. Instead, they had given him a second chance. But whether that chance was earned or merely the result of manipulation would remain a question without answer. Revan had once believed that knowledge was strength, that power could be wielded for balance, that darkness could be a tool for light. Now, stripped of certainty, haunted by past choices and guided by instincts he could no longer deny, he found himself walking a path no Jedi or Sith had ever truly followed. A path between absolutes, forged not by obedience or domination, but by will. And so, with the pieces of his identity scattered like stars, Revan began to reshape himself once more. Not as a pawn of the Council, nor a slave of the Sith, but as something else. Something the galaxy would soon remember. The hidden war inside his mind was not over. It had only just begun. Chapter 6. Redemption and Revelation. Return to the light. Revan's return to himself was not sudden. It was a slow, uneasy unfurling, like the lifting of a dense fog after a long, restless night. The truths buried within him, layered in silence and soothed with half-lies, did not rush to the surface. They came in fragments, flashes of battle, echoes of voices long silenced, the weight of decisions that still hung heavy in the Force. The dreams were no longer just visions, they became memories, demanding acknowledgement. The mask he once wore, the lives he had touched or destroyed, the commands he had given that shaped the fate of worlds, all began to claw their way back from the dark corners of his mind. And yet, through it all, Revan did not falter. Each piece of himself that returned was examined, not as a man recoiling from his past, but as one preparing to confront it. He remembered not just what he had done, but why, and that was the difference. The man he was now, shaped by mercy, tested by betrayal, grounded by pain, could no longer be what he once had been. The path ahead was no longer about reclaiming power, but undoing the catastrophe he had helped set in motion. The decision to destroy the Star Forge was not made in anger or desperation. It was calculated, like all of Revan's choices. With each step toward its coordinates, with each recovered piece of the ancient Rakatan star maps, he understood more clearly what the Star Forge was. It had never been a mere superweapon. It was alive in its own way, steeped in centuries of hatred, created by a race whose empire had been built upon domination and cruelty. The Star Forge was not a tool that could be bent to a noble cause. It corrupted its users by feeding on their darker impulses, turning strategy into obsession, purpose into tyranny. Revan, once its master, now saw it as an echo of the mistake he had nearly become. The Rakata had fallen because they believed they could control what should have never been touched. Revan would not make that error twice. Still, to reach the forge, Revan had to return to the cradle of his darkest thoughts, Korriban. The ancient Sith homeworld, lined with tombs and soaked in the memories of death, had once been his proving ground. Now it stood as his test. The planet was a storm of dark side energy, and within its broken temples, Sith acolytes and warlords still paid homage to the teachings Revan had once revived. Many believed him dead or disgraced, but the moment he stepped onto the red soil of Korriban, the Force itself shuddered. Some felt awe, others felt fear. There were duels, of course. Challenges issued not in ceremony but in blood. Revan did not seek to rule them again, nor to preach redemption. He came as a reckoning. Where he was challenged, he responded with precision. Where he was questioned, he answered not with titles, but with purpose. The Sith teachings, twisted echoes of what he had once intended, had become corrupted even further in his absence. What was once a disciplined system of knowledge had turned into a theater of cruelty and betrayal. Revan walked through it, like a shadow of judgment, not to reclaim dominion, but to close a chapter left open too long. The confrontation with Malak loomed, growing in certainty with every choice Revan made. Bastila, who had stood by him through war and awakening, had been captured and turned during an ambush, corrupted by the very dark side Revan had once wielded with pride. The irony was not lost on him. Bastila's battle meditation, the same gift that had once been the Republic's greatest hope, was now used to empower Malak's forces. Her conversion struck deeply at Revan's soul, for he saw in her fall the reflection of his own. She had not been weak, she had been wounded, vulnerable, and Malak had seized that moment. Revan understood that truth too well, and when he faced her again deep within the bowels of the Star Forge, it was not with fury, but with clarity. He reached out not to defeat her, but to bring her back. It was not a duel of blades, but of truths. He spoke not as a Jedi or a Sith, but as someone who had walked both paths and survived. Through his words and her memory of who he had become since the fall, Bastila broke free of Malak's control. Her redemption marked a turning point. She returned to the light, and with her, the balance of the battle began to shift. Malak by then had embraced his role completely. The betrayal that had once been calculated ambition had morphed into a monstrous hunger for dominance. He had fused prisoners to machines, drawn life from the dying, and even experimented on Force-sensitive captives to prolong his own strength. His methods were abominable, his logic reduced to the raw mechanics of fear and control. The final confrontation between Revan and Malak unfolded not just in the physical realm but within the Force itself. As sabers clashed and the Star Forge trembled around them, Malak tried to break Revan with accusations, with memories, with reminders of the man he had once been, but Revan did not deny those truths. He acknowledged them, carried them, and refused to be defined by them. Where Malak saw power as the end of all things, Revan saw redemption not as erasure, but transformation. In the end, Malak died as he had lived since his fall, alone, unrepentant, and unable to understand why he had lost. There were lesser-known moments in the journey that carried equal weight. On Dantooine, before the Jedi Enclave was destroyed, Revan had walked its serene paths again. He had stood in the council chamber where his mind had once been remade, listening not as a pawn or prisoner, but as a man who knew what had been taken from him. When the council finally acknowledged the truth, they did so with hesitance. There was no celebration in his return, no forgiveness, no full embrace. They had molded him into a weapon when it suited them, and now feared what he had become. They thanked him, formally, for his service, but they could not allow him to return to the Order. Revan understood. He did not ask to be accepted. His path had outgrown their structure. The Jedi had played their part, but they were no longer his guides. On Rakata Prime, where the Star Forge lay in orbit, Revan encountered the ancient remnants of the Builders themselves. The Rakatan people, broken and diminished, offered him insight into the cost of arrogance. Their technology had once ruled the stars, and now they lived in stone huts, their force sensitivity eroded by eons of pride and savagery. Revan stood among them not as a conqueror, but as a cautionary echo of their fate. He studied their decline, pieced together their language, and used the knowledge not to subjugate, but to dismantle. He turned their legacy against the Forge, using ancient codes and symbols to weaken its influence. It was through their own knowledge, reinterpreted with care and humility, that Revan ensured the Star Forge could be destroyed. When the final battle came, the combined Republic fleet assaulted the Star Forge, while Revan and his allies fought through waves of defenders within. The structure itself resisted destruction, fighting back with droid legions and dark force emanations that twisted minds and bent reality. But with Bastila's battle meditation restored and focused in support of the Republic, and with Revan's determination leading the assault, the Star Forge fell. Its death was not merely a mechanical collapse, but a spiritual release. The dark currents that had flowed through it dispersed, leaving a silence that stretched across the Force. Revan stood amid its ruins, not in triumph, but in quiet resolve. The greatest weapon ever built had been destroyed. The Sith Empire he had forged had been dismantled. The galaxy would breathe again. But peace was not the end of his journey. The Jedi Council's refusal to reintegrate him fully was not unexpected. He had defied them, embarrassed them, and proven that their judgment was flawed. To welcome him back would be to admit failure, and so they allowed him to walk free, a Jedi in all but name, with no rank, no title, and no place among them. Yet Revan bore no bitterness. He understood their fear, even if he did not agree with their limitation. The galaxy was safe, for now, but the darkness he had glimpsed in the unknown regions had not vanished. The true Sith, the ancient empire hidden in the void, remained, and Revan knew that his redemption was not a conclusion. It was a preparation. He would leave again, alone if necessary, to confront the threat before it could rise. Revan's path to redemption was not a return to what he had been. It was a reinvention. He was not a Jedi, not a Sith, not even the sum of both. He was a man who had seen the extremes of power and humility, of control and vulnerability, and had chosen something greater. His mind was no longer fractured, his purpose no longer hidden. He had been used, betrayed, broken, and remade. And yet he endured, not because he sought glory, but because the galaxy needed guardians who understood the price of failure. In the end, Revan became what few ever did, a Force sensitive who had walked through every fire and returned, not as a servant of light or dark, but as a master of his own will. And that made him more dangerous and more necessary than ever before. Chapter 7. Shadows in the Unknown Regions. Revan's disappearance. The Republic rejoiced. The Sith Empire Revan had built had crumbled. The Star Forge was destroyed, and Darth Malak lay dead beneath the flames of his own ambition. From Coruscant to the furthest outposts of the Outer Rim, peace returned like the first gentle light after a terrible storm. Revan, once feared and hated as a dark warlord, now walked freely among the people he had once vowed to conquer. Some hailed him as a redeemed hero. Others whispered uneasily, unwilling to forget the destruction his earlier campaign had wrought. The Jedi Council remained distant, unwilling to welcome him back fully into their ranks, but no longer calling for his destruction. It seemed to the rest of the galaxy that Revan's story had reached its end. But Revan knew better. Even as others spoke of peace, he saw the future written in trembling shadows. The war with Malak had only been a diversion. The real enemy still waited in the void beyond the stars. Long before the Jedi Civil War had begun, Revan had discovered a truth buried in ancient holocrons and Sith ruins, references to a hidden power, a Sith empire untouched by the known galaxy, older than the Republic, driven into hiding but never destroyed. The Mandalorians had been manipulated by this unseen force, their crusade a prelude to something far greater. Malak's rise had been only one thread in a much darker tapestry. Revan had glimpsed it during his original fall into the dark side, and again when he walked the shattered halls of Rakata Prime. Now, with his memories restored and his identity fully formed, the gravity of that knowledge returned with terrifying clarity. The true Sith were real. They had bided their time in the unknown regions, waiting for the Republic and the Jedi to grow complacent. Revan could not stand by and wait for that invasion to come. He would meet it first on his own terms. The decision to leave was not made lightly. Bastila, his closest companion and the one who had risked everything to redeem him, knew the moment was approaching long before he spoke it aloud. Their bond had grown beyond training or romance. It was a connection forged through war, loss, and revelation. But she could sense the pull in him, the way he lingered in meditation, his mind reaching outward, as though already tracing invisible paths into the distant stars. Revan confided in her the truth of what he feared. He explained that the Jedi would not believe him, the Republic would not understand, and if he stayed, the darkness would strike while the galaxy remained unprepared. He would go alone if necessary. Bastila pleaded with him to stay, or at least to take others with him, but Revan was resolute. This mission was too dangerous, the enemy he would face too unknown. He would not risk others unless he had no choice. Their farewell was quiet, not dramatic. There were no grand declarations or final embraces, just a shared understanding that love, while powerful, could not bind a soul with such a burden. Bastila watched him go with tears she refused to shed, knowing he might never return. He also parted ways with his other companions, those who had followed him across the galaxy in the hunt for the Star Forge, risking their lives to stop the Sith. Mission Vow, Jali Bindo, Canderous Ordo, T3M4, HK47. Each had played their part in his redemption. Each had given something of themselves to the cause. Revan made efforts to ensure they were cared for, their futures stable. Canderous, the Mandalorian, he entrusted with a secret task: to gather what remained of his scattered people and forge them into something new, something better. In Canderous, Revan saw a legacy that could either repeat old cycles or break them entirely. Jolee was left to wander, to speak his wisdom to whomever would listen. HK-47 and T3M4 he kept close, bringing them aboard his vessel for the journey ahead. Machines had no fear of what lay beyond the stars, and Revan trusted them more than most. The ship he took was small, sleek and unmarked, capable of independent hyperspace calibration. Its systems were enhanced with stealth technology acquired during the war, and its databanks loaded with everything he had uncovered regarding ancient Sith language, coordinates, and signals. He charted a path beyond the edge of the Outer Rim, into the gravitational maelstroms and dark corridors of the unknown regions. These were places where hyperspace routes failed, where navigational beacons had never reached, and where even the Force felt quiet, twisted, or unreadable. What Revan found was not empty space, but a haunted realm filled with remnants of ancient empires, long-dead civilizations, and lurking dangers both physical and spiritual. He passed through fields of broken starships, ancient war machines drifting silently like ghosts. He uncovered worlds so heavily scarred by Force warfare that they resonated with pain centuries old. It was a graveyard of forgotten history, but also a breeding ground for something more sinister. Eventually, Revan's search bore fruit. He followed obscure signals and unnatural Force echoes to a world hidden within a pocket of space that defied stellar mapping. There, nestled among blackened stars and guarded by war fleets that had never served the Republic, he found the Sith Eternal. The true Sith Empire had survived as he feared, smaller in number than during its ancient peak, but no less dangerous. It had remained hidden by design, its people bred for obedience, its military forces trained in silence and secrecy, and its dark council ruled by one mind, Vitiate, the Sith Emperor. A being of near immortal power and insatiable hunger, Vitiate had extended his life through rituals so abhorrent they bent the Force itself. He had consumed entire worlds, sacrificed countless lives, and carved a throne from despair. Revan, despite his preparation, was not ready for what he encountered. He was captured before he could escape, his vessel torn from space by tractor fields and ancient gravity wells. He fought valiantly, wielding both light and dark with practiced balance, but the numbers overwhelmed him. His droids were separated, his weapons stripped, his connection to the Force suppressed by Sith sorcery, refined over thousands of years. Revan was taken before Vitiate, shackled and bleeding yet defiant. The Emperor did not rage or gloat, he merely observed, curious, silent, terrible. With no need for armies or fleets, Vitiate invaded Revan's mind. He did not ask questions. He tore through memories, emotions, and thoughts like a hurricane. But Revan, though broken in body, remained unbroken in will. His mind, sharpened by years of philosophical meditation, war-hardened reflection, and layers of inner duality, resisted the worst of the assault. So began Revan's years of imprisonment, not in a conventional cell, but within a specially constructed containment designed to suppress and study him. He was kept alive not out of mercy, but utility. Vitiate believed that through Revan's memories and power, he could further refine his own plans to conquer the galaxy. Revan became both a prisoner and an experiment. Psychologically, he was tortured constantly. Memories of failure were played back endlessly, his fears were amplified. His mind was flooded with illusions, dreams in which he betrayed those he loved, saw the Republic fall, watched Bastila die again and again. Every moment was a test, a torment. Yet Revan endured. He meditated in silence, shaping mental barriers not to hide from the pain, but to reshape it. He turned every agony into understanding, every illusion into a lesson. The Force, still present within him even when suppressed, became a quiet companion. In those moments, Revan was more Jedi than he had ever been. Not a warrior, not a strategist, but a soul resisting absolute darkness, with nothing but belief in his own purpose. Time became meaningless. Years passed. His body grew frail, his hair turned grey, but his mind sharpened like a blade under constant pressure. He learned the patterns of his guards, studied the energy fields that confined him, listened to whispers from other prisoners held in stasis or tortured into madness. He discovered that he was not the only one Vitiate had captured. Others had come before him, some Jedi, some Sith, all consumed, but none had resisted, none had lasted. Revan became a legend even among the Sith Eternal, his endurance feared as much as his past conquests. The Emperor, for all his power, could not fully break him. That defiance, quiet and unshakable, became Revan's weapon. Eventually, his presence in the Force, though muted, began to echo outward. Beyond the unknown regions, Force sensitives began to feel a disturbance, a pulse of defiance amid the dark currents. The legacy Revan had left behind, the people he had inspired, the truths he had uncovered, all lingered in the galaxy, drawing others toward him like fragments seeking their source. He had not been forgotten. The war he feared still brewed in silence. But so too did hope. His endurance was not just survival, it was preparation. Revan remained in the shadows, hidden in the heart of the enemy, not defeated but waiting, not lost, but watching. The time would come when chains would shatter, when memory would become purpose again, and when the light and dark within him would unite not in conflict, but in clarity. Revan had disappeared, but the Force, ever flowing, had not let him go, and neither would the galaxy. Chapter 8: The Force Unbound, Revan's Powers and Philosophy. Revan's legend was built on many things: his military genius, his ability to sway armies, his fall and redemption, and the far-reaching consequences of his choices. But none of it would have been possible without the singular power that lay at his core. His connection to the Force was not only strong, it was uniquely adaptive. From his earliest days as a Jedi, Revan displayed an almost preternatural sensitivity, not simply in strength, but in precision. He could sense movements in the Force before they happened, anticipate patterns others missed, and tune his awareness with terrifying accuracy to the flow of events. This battle precognition was not mere instinct, it was a calculated understanding, like a strategist watching the currents of war not on maps, but through the Force itself. Revan would walk onto a battlefield and perceive where danger was gathering, where fear pulsed in the hearts of soldiers, where weakness in resolve would crack an enemy line. His use of precognition was not limited to saber duels or personal combat, but extended into fleet engagements, logistics, and diplomacy. It made him a master of control, not only of himself, but of entire theaters of war. Telepathy was another of Revan's refined talents. He could speak without words, read thoughts without breaking focus, and project emotions and concepts to others with crystal clarity. But he did not abuse this ability. Even at the height of his power as a Sith Lord, Revan rarely used telepathy to dominate. He listened as often as he spoke. When he did enter another's mind, it was with surgical precision. He could uncover lies, calm fear, or in rare cases, plant subtle impressions that would later influence decisions. His mind control, when employed, was not brute force compulsion, but elegant suggestion. Many who later served him would insist they had never been controlled, even if they had changed sides after only a single encounter. That was Revan's true power. He understood people, and he understood the Force as a means to illuminate their motivations rather than simply overpower them. Revan's approach to the Force was fundamentally different from the dichotomy that dominated Jedi and Sith teachings. He saw the Force not as two warring halves, but as a single entity expressed through different lenses. He had walked both paths. As a Jedi, he learned restraint, discipline, meditation, and compassion. As a Sith, he had mastered strength, passion, clarity, and will. But instead of choosing one over the other, he synthesized them. To Revan, the Force was like a star. It could burn or illuminate, destroy or guide. The light and dark sides were not enemies, but expressions of potential. His philosophy, later echoed in the teachings of the Revanites, proposed that true mastery of the Force required understanding both perspectives, not falling to them, but integrating their truths into a balanced whole. This philosophy was deeply controversial, even heretical to the Jedi and the Sith alike, but it was also deeply compelling. Revan taught that emotion could be a strength, that fear could be faced without shame, that attachment need not lead to suffering if it was understood. He believed that control over the self was the foundation of all Force mastery, not blind obedience to code or passion. He spoke of the will of the Force as a living current, one that required interpretation, not passive acceptance. His philosophy was not about balance for its own sake, it was about survival, about making the galaxy resilient enough to weather the storms of war, deceit, and chaos. Many of his followers, both Jedi and Sith converts, struggled to walk this middle path, but those who succeeded found a power that was neither dependent on light nor bound by darkness. It was personal, internal, and deeply transformative. Among the more arcane abilities Revan demonstrated were connections to ancient Force techniques long forgotten by the wider galaxy. One of the most significant was the Force bond. With Bastila Shan, this bond became the key to both of their transformations. It allowed them to sense each other's thoughts and emotions, to coordinate in battle without speaking, and to survive situations that would have killed either one alone. But the Force bond was not unique to Bastila. Revan formed bonds with many of his companions, both intentionally and subconsciously. These connections allowed him to share strength, endure pain on behalf of others, and even sense changes in the Force through them. It was one of the reasons his teams functioned so cohesively in the field. They did not follow him because of command. They followed because they felt him. Another rare ability Revan wielded was Sever Force. a technique considered forbidden and largely mythical among most Jedi. Sever Force allowed the user to cut another being's connection to the Force entirely. It was not merely disarming, it was spiritual annihilation. The subject, once severed, became empty to the Force, incapable of sensing or manipulating it, often left adrift and hollow. Revan did not use this power recklessly, but he had learned it, refined it, and used it when the stakes demanded it. Against particularly dangerous Sith or corrupted Force-sensitive threats, Revan could choose not to kill, but to strip away their connection and leave them to confront their existence without power. This act, while seen by many as cruel, was for Revan a kind of mercy. It gave the fallen a chance to reflect, to live without the distortion of power, and in rare cases, it opened the path to redemption. He understood that some enemies could only be defeated by removing the very fuel of their corruption. The legacy of Revan's Force abilities and philosophy extended far beyond his own lifetime. Kreia, once known as Darth Treya, had studied under Revan and later shaped her own teachings around the central paradox he embodied. Though her path diverged into bitterness and manipulation, she carried Revan's influence like a scar. She believed, as he had, that the Force could not be trusted to guide galactic destiny blindly. She taught the exile, Metra Surik, with the hope that someone might understand Revan's path better than he himself had. Metra, a war hero turned outcast, carried the burden of having followed Revan during the Mandalorian Wars and then returned to find the Jedi broken. Her connection to Revan was deep, forged in loyalty and loss. She searched for him after his disappearance, drawn by a pull in the Force that never faded. Her eventual discovery of his fate and her role in attempting to free him from the Sith Emperor's grasp was a testament to the bond they had shared. Another touched by Revan's influence was Lord Scourge, a Sith pureblood who had served the Emperor directly. Scourge encountered Revan during his long imprisonment and witnessed firsthand the resilience and clarity of purpose that defined him. Over time, Revan's presence began to unravel Scourge's loyalty to the Emperor. Through countless hours of shared imprisonment and conversation, Revan planted seeds of doubt, of possibility in Scourge's mind. Though Revan's attempts to turn him did not bear immediate fruit, they set in motion a transformation that would later affect galactic events in profound ways. Scourge would go on to betray the Emperor in his own time, aligning himself with Jedi and Republic forces, not out of faith, but out of a belief in a greater purpose that Revan had revealed to him. Revan's vision of balance, however, was not without complexity. It defied simplicity, and many who tried to walk his path failed to grasp its weight. To balance light and dark within oneself is not to indulge both, but to understand them deeply enough to resist the worst of each. Revan knew that the dark side was seductive, that its power came quickly and cost dearly. He also knew that the light side could become rigid, dogmatic, and blind to suffering. His philosophy demanded constant awareness, self-discipline, and humility. It was not a static equilibrium, but a living tension. One could not rest in it. One had to walk it daily, always aware that the next step might tilt too far. To the Jedi, Revan was too dangerous, too willing to question sacred tenets, too capable of justifying ends with means. To the Sith, he was a traitor, a betrayer of power, a hypocrite who used the dark side and then discarded it. But to those who truly listened, Revan was something else, a voice from the edge of possibility, offering a third path that neither side had dared to walk. He proved that power and morality need not be opposites, that strength did not require hatred, and that compassion did not demand blindness. His story became legend not only because of what he did, but because of what he represented. In the end, Revan's understanding of the Force was unbound by doctrine. He saw it not as a set of rules to follow, but as a living truth to interpret. He believed that the Force had a will, but that will was not absolute. It was shaped by those who used it. He believed that destiny was not fixed, but written by those brave enough to question it. His journey through light and dark, through memory and loss, through empire and redemption, taught him that true mastery came not from choosing a side, but from transcending them. He lived with guilt and hope, failure and purpose, and in doing so became something more than Jedi or Sith. He became the living embodiment of possibility, proof that the Force, when unbound, could elevate not only power but wisdom. And in the silence of the unknown regions, where his influence still pulsed like a beacon waiting to be found, the legacy of Revan's truth endured, echoing in every Force-sensitive brave enough to ask not what they were allowed to do, but what they should do. Chapter 9. Final Conflict. Revan Reborn and the Fight for the Future. Long after the galaxy had moved on and new wars consumed its stars, whispers of Revan still traveled through ancient temples, encrypted Sith archives, and in the minds of the most sensitive Jedi Masters who occasionally caught echoes in their meditations. Though believed long dead after vanishing into the unknown regions, Revan's fate remained one of the galaxy's enduring mysteries. Those who knew the truth had either passed into silence or were dismissed as mad. Yet the truth persisted, hidden beneath the folds of history and buried deep within the conflicts that raged during the era of Star Wars: The Old Republic. For centuries, Revan had endured in the shadows, imprisoned and fragmented, his body and mind held hostage by the same being he had once sought to destroy, the Sith Emperor. Vitiate, the ancient and terrible ruler of the Sith Eternal, had not killed Revan upon capturing him. Instead, he kept him alive, suspended in stasis deep within the core of Dromund Kaas, feeding off Revan's Force presence to fuel his own immortality. For over 3 centuries, Revan remained confined, kept awake yet helpless, subjected to endless psychic invasion. His mind, however, proved as indomitable as his legend. While Vitiate probed for knowledge and submission, Revan resisted, constructing mental fortresses layered with memory, pain, and defiance. It was in this liminal state, neither fully conscious nor entirely broken, that Revan's psyche began to fracture. The light within him, the side shaped by redemption, love, and understanding, held fast to his identity. But the dark, the part of him that had once embraced power and domination, grew restless. With each passing year, the divide deepened. In his isolation, Revan became two. Eventually, Revan was freed not by his own hand, but by a convergence of allies and enemies alike. During the Galactic War between the Republic and the resurgent Sith Empire, a coalition of heroes uncovered the truth of Revan's fate. The liberation was swift and violent, the echo of ancient prophecy fulfilling itself in laser fire and lightsaber clashes. His physical body, still aged and worn, emerged from stasis, weakened but intact. But something had changed. Revan was not whole. He was both man and memory, light and shadow, a being whose very soul had been twisted by centuries of suffering. The dark half of him, long suppressed during imprisonment, now spoke louder, more urgently. No longer tempered by humility, it pushed him toward a singular, absolute goal: the death of the Emperor at any cost. When Revan's return to the wider galaxy was marked by immediate conflict, he did not seek reunion with old allies or reassimilation into the Jedi or Sith orders. Instead, he launched a campaign fueled by vengeance and inevitability. He formed a faction of devoted followers, many of them Revanites, who had kept his teachings alive in secret. With advanced technology and ancient knowledge, Revan struck at both the Republic and the Empire, destabilizing them, disrupting military operations and sabotaging diplomatic efforts. He was no longer acting in the name of balance or philosophical insight. He was singular in purpose. In his mind, the death of Vitiate was not just necessary, it was the only outcome that mattered. The threat of the Emperor was too great to allow any hesitation. If the galaxy refused to unite against him, then Revan would bend it into obedience, as he once tried before. But Revan had not lost all reason. He understood that the Emperor could not be defeated through conventional means. He also understood that, regardless of faction, the galaxy's greatest Force users would need to stand together. In a remarkable and uneasy moment of clarity, Revan reached out to both Republic operatives and Sith warriors, forging a temporary alliance bound by necessity. A joint strike force was assembled to penetrate the Foundry, a massive space station once used by the Infinite Empire and now repurposed by Revan's forces. His intent was to use the station to construct an army of droids infused with Force knowledge, a mechanized legion capable of overwhelming the Emperor's defenses. The Republic and Sith teams fought their way through the facility, confronting droid monstrosities and fanatical Revanites until they finally reached Revan himself. The battle that followed was unlike any the galaxy had seen. Revan, drawing on both light and dark, fought with a fury and skill that defied time. His power had not diminished. If anything, it had become more refined, more deliberate. He moved with the experience of 1,000 battles, wielding both the fury of a Sith Lord and the clarity of a Jedi Master. Against him stood warriors of immense strength, yet even they struggled to match his control over the Force. He could read their movements, anticipate their strikes, and counter their attacks with ruthless precision. The chamber trembled with unleashed energy as Force waves shattered Durasteel and scorched the floor. But in the end, Revan's body could no longer sustain his fury. The years of imprisonment, the fracture in his soul, the weight of obsession, these had all taken their toll. He fell in battle, struck down by the combined might of those who had come to stop him, his lightsaber finally slipping from his hand. But death did not end Revan. As his body crumpled, the Force within him did not disperse, it ruptured. His spirit split into two, the final expression of a duality that had haunted him all his life. The light side of Revan, the part that remembered love, sacrifice, and hope, ascended into the Force, becoming one with its endless current. But the dark side, the rage that had festered during his centuries of captivity, remained tethered to the world of the living. This shadow, a fragment of will given form, lingered within the Foundry, a bitter echo that refused to fade. It continued to influence Revan's followers, driving them to further extremism, keeping the idea of absolute vengeance alive. In time, this dark fragment would need to be confronted as its own entity, for it had become something Revan never intended, a ghost born of pain. The Republic and Empire both honored the fallen Revan in different ways. The Jedi whispered his name as a cautionary tale of power misused and the high cost of straying from the code. The Sith reviled him as a traitor who had dared to reject true strength, but neither truly understood him. Revan had transcended their ideologies. He had become the embodiment of the Force's contradictions, a man who had held peace and war in equal hands, who had mastered the light without abandoning the dark, who had fought to save a galaxy that could never fully accept him. His influence persisted not just through history books or whispered legends, but in the meditations of Force-sensitive beings across generations. Many who reached beyond the teachings of their orders found themselves repeating his questions. What does it mean to be truly balanced in the Force? Can power be wielded without corruption? Is destiny a path to walk or a burden to defy? Even in spiritual fragmentation, Revan's presence lingered. Jedi Masters seeking guidance in moments of moral uncertainty reported visions of a hooded figure who spoke in riddles but offered peace. Sith apprentices in secret meditation sometimes felt an unseen presence testing their will, pressing them to question their purpose. On obscure Force-sensitive worlds, entire sects emerged who worshipped Revan not as a god, but as a symbol of transformation, a being who had fallen, risen, and endured. Some claimed to hear his voice in ancient temples, others believed he guided those who stood on the brink of their own inner wars. These stories, scattered and unverifiable, formed the mythology of Revan Reborn. Revan had fallen in love with Gaisa, yet the Force itself seemed to remember him. Revan had always believed that the Force was a living will, shaped by those who wielded it. In his final moments, his soul had given shape to that belief. One part of him surrendered to the greater whole, dissolving into the flow of energy that binds the galaxy together. The other part remained as a necessary shadow, an unresolved chord in the symphony of the Force, and in that duality, Revan continued his work, not through saber or speech, but through presence, through influence, through the choices made by those who came after. The fight for the future did not end with Revan's final battle. It continued in every Jedi who questioned their place, in every Sith who felt the stirrings of compassion, in every Force sensitive who dared to believe that strength and wisdom could coexist. Revan's name became more than a legend. It became a question etched into the fabric of galactic history, a challenge to all who touched the Force to look deeper, to strive further, and to accept that the path to truth is never simple. Revan was many things: warrior, scholar, tyrant, savior, but above all, he was a seeker. And though his body had passed and his mind had fractured, his spirit remained unbound, moving still through the currents of the Force, waiting for the next voice willing to listen. Chapter 10: Echoes Through the Force. Legacy of Revan. The galaxy, vast and ceaseless in its motion, often forgets those who shaped its course. Names fade into myth, empires rise and fall, and the great battles of the past become little more than contested footnotes in the archives of Coruscant or the restricted vaults of the Jedi Temple. Yet some names resist erasure, lingering in memory like echoes that refuse to be silenced. Revan was one such name: warrior, conqueror, liberator, heretic. No single word could contain his legacy. His story was one of dualities, of contradictions made flesh, of a Force sensitive who walked through fire and shadow, not as a servant of light or dark, but as a creature of their confluence. And though his body had long vanished, his influence rippled across generations like a stone cast into an endless sea. Among the first and most visible manifestations of Revan's legacy was the formation of the Revanites. This cult, if it could be called that, arose during the early years of the renewed war between the Republic and the Sith Empire. Its followers were diverse: former Jedi, rogues, Sith, scholars, soldiers, and wanderers, bound together by a single unshakable conviction that Revan had understood the Force in a way no order ever had, and that his path offered truth beyond the dogma of either tradition. The Revanites rejected the binary notions of Jedi and Sith. To them, the Force was not divided by moral poles, but unified by will and understanding. They preached discipline and passion, peace and strength, serenity and clarity. They held gatherings in the forests of Dromund Kars and the caverns of hidden worlds, where Revan's words, gathered from scattered texts and reconstructed speeches, were treated as scripture. They believed that Revan had not died, that his spirit lingered, guiding those who could hear him, and perhaps, in the strange silence between worlds, he did. The Revanites' philosophy, while dismissed as heretical by both the Jedi and the Sith, began to infect the wider discourse around the Force. Jedi masters who had once spoken in absolutes found themselves questioning the rigidity of their teachings. Some Sith lords, though still cloaked in cruelty and ambition, began to investigate ancient texts with greater nuance, wondering if passion alone could sustain power without collapse. The very existence of Revan's path called into question the foundational assumptions of the galaxy's oldest institutions. If he could master both light and dark without being utterly consumed, what did that say about the teachings that forbade exploration of the other side? If his redemption had not required the destruction of his past, could a new model of understanding be possible? In the halls of the Jedi Temple, Revan's name was spoken with a blend of reverence and unease. Officially, he remained a figure of caution, used to warn young initiates about the dangers of unchecked ambition and the perils of questioning the code. Yet within the sealed chambers of Jedi historians and archivists, a different conversation persisted. Holocrons once thought lost had surfaced, containing fragments of Revan's recorded thoughts. In them, he did not rage or boast. He spoke plainly, sometimes wistfully, always thoughtfully. He questioned the Force, not in defiance, but in pursuit of clarity. He described his fall not as corruption, but as necessity. He warned that peace, if held too tightly, could become a prison. The Council debated whether these records should be shared and ultimately locked many away. But the knowledge could not be contained. Secrets, once discovered, have a way of leaking into the cracks of silence. The Sith, on their side, condemned Revan as a traitor, yet they too could not fully dismiss him. Some among their ranks studied his campaigns with admiration, marveling at the empire he had built in so short a time. Others dissected his battle meditations, his strategies, his methods of controlling vast fleets and turning enemies into allies. And some, the more introspective lords who dared to meditate without malice, found themselves haunted by his contradictions. They saw in Revan not failure, but evolution, a being who had taken the raw power of the dark side and reshaped it, not for pleasure, but for purpose. A being who had walked away from power when it no longer aligned with his vision. That, more than anything, disturbed them. Power to the Sith was meant to be clung to. Revan had let it go, and yet he had remained powerful. Across forgotten worlds and ancient ruins, Revan's name was carved into stone and memory alike. On Leon, among the remnants of the Rakaton Star Forge, Force sensitives could feel the tremors of his passage. On Malachor V, where the scars of war still whispered through broken earth, his voice echoed in the Force for those who dared to listen. On Dantooine, beneath the regrown grass at the Jedi Enclave, visions of Revan sometimes appeared in meditation chambers, speaking not of power, but of questions left unanswered. Even on Korriban, the heart of Sith tradition, some acolytes reported dreams of a masked figure who asked them why they truly sought power and whether they could ever be free of the fear that birthed their rage. These were not hauntings, they were reminders. The myth of Revan grew in directions even he would not have anticipated. Some called him the savior of the Republic, the man who had turned the tide of the Mandalorian Wars, redeemed himself, and sacrificed his freedom to stop a greater evil. Others painted him as a destroyer, the one who had ignited the Jedi Civil War, corrupted Bastila Shan, and nearly brought the galaxy to its knees with the Star Forge. Both stories were true, and that was what made him eternal. He could not be reduced to a simple arc. He was a mirror held up to the galaxy's soul, showing what happens when ideals collide with necessity, when power is gained not for glory but for duty, and when redemption does not erase the past but incorporates it. Revan was not clean. He was not perfect. And in that imperfection, people found something more honest than the sanitized legends of the Order. Even centuries after his passing, Revan's influence shaped the development of Force doctrine in subtle but irreversible ways. Independent enclaves began teaching his writings, blending Jedi meditation with Sith-focused techniques. Lightsaber forms were adapted to include his hybrid combat styles. Force scholars debated his teachings as much as they did those of Udanur or Bane. Revan's philosophy of balance, genuine balance, not avoidance or suppression, became a new lens through which to study the Force. It challenged the binary, forcing a new generation of Jedi and Sith alike to confront the limitations of their dogma. Not all embraced it. Some resisted with vehemence, fearing that such flexibility would lead to collapse. But others, quietly and with patience, began to teach a different way. They spoke of Revan not as a messiah or a monster, but as a guide who had walked through every fire and returned with a deeper understanding. The divide between Jedi and Sith was never healed, not fully. Wars continued, ideologies clashed, and new threats emerged, as they always had. But wherever there were Force sensitives who struggled with identity, who sought meaning beyond absolutes, Revan's voice remained. In the silence of ancient temples, in the chaos of galactic politics, in the internal battles of those caught between fear and hope, His teachings endured. He was not always understood. He was not always loved. But he was remembered. And in a galaxy where memory is often the first casualty of war, that was its own kind of immortality. Revan's final lesson, the one etched into the core of every story told about him, was that the Force is not a destination, it is a journey, one that must be walked with humility, courage, and relentless inquiry. He taught that identity is not fixed, that redemption does not require denial of one's past, and that truth lies not in choosing light or dark, but in facing both and emerging not as a servant, but as a master of one's own path. His name became a question whispered by those who stood at the crossroads of destiny. What if there is another way? And so Revan remains, not in form, but in idea. A current in the Force that never stops moving. A voice in the minds of the brave and the broken alike. Not bound by order, not erased by time. Still watching, still teaching, still echoing through the Force.